James Alden had always been a man of rules. From the very first day he joined the Royal Guard, he embraced the strict discipline that came with the role. His superiors often praised him for his unwavering focus and dedication. Over time, he rose through the ranks, eventually becoming the head of the Royal Guard, a position that carried immense responsibility. But it wasn't just his professionalism that earned him respect. It was his quiet strength and ability to remain calm under pressure. To most people, James seemed like an unshakable pillar of stability. Yet, beneath his stoic exterior lay a man deeply shaped by the Queen's influence. When James first entered the royal service, he was young, ambitious, and eager to prove himself. He quickly learned that being part of the Royal Guard wasn't just about standing tall in parades or guarding palaces. It was about protecting someone who mattered more than anything else. For James, serving Queen Eleanor II became much more than a job. She treated him not as a mere guard, but as a trusted ally. On countless occasions, she'd stop mid-conversation to ask how Lily, his daughter, was doing. She remembered birthdays, milestones, and even small details about James's life outside the palace walls. These gestures weren't required. They were simply who she was. As the years passed, their bond grew stronger. James found comfort in knowing that no matter how chaotic the world became, the Queen remained steady and kind. Her presence was a constant source of reassurance. That's why her death hit him harder than he ever anticipated. Now, standing at the forefront of her funeral procession, James felt the weight of 2 decades' worth of loyalty pressing down on him. Each step forward felt heavier than the last. He kept reminding himself of the importance of maintaining composure, but it was getting harder with every passing moment. The memories flooding his mind didn't help either. He thought about the times when the Queen would visit the guards' quarters late at night, bringing hot tea and sandwiches during long shifts. She never acted like royalty in those moments. She was simply one of them, sharing stories and laughter. Then there was the time when tragedy struck his family. After his wife died unexpectedly, James was consumed by grief and uncertainty. Raising Lily alone while fulfilling his duties seemed impossible. It was the Queen who stepped in without fanfare, ensuring that James received the support he needed. She arranged for childcare assistance and made sure his financial burdens were eased. She never mentioned it afterward, nor did she expect gratitude. To her, it was simply the right thing to do. Now, as James marched alongside the Queen's coffin, he couldn't shake the feeling that he owed her everything. She had given him purpose, stability, and hope when he needed it most. And yet here he was, unable to repay her kindness in any meaningful way. All he could do was stand tall and honor her memory by upholding the standards she valued so highly. Or so he thought. As the procession neared the cathedral, James began to feel a strange tension building inside him. The weight of duty clashed with the storm of emotions threatening to break free. He knew what was expected of him, to remain composed, to follow protocol without question. But something deep within him whispered that this day might demand more than just obedience. This was no ordinary occasion. This was the farewell to someone who had changed his life forever. Could he truly suppress his feelings when every fiber of his being wanted to express them? For now, James pushed the thoughts aside, focusing on the rhythmic cadence of his boots against the pavement. Yet the question lingered. How long could he hold back before emotion overtook him completely? As the funeral procession approached the grand steps of the cathedral, a sudden gust of wind swept through the square. The air, already thick with emotion, seemed to hold its breath as the unexpected breeze caught the edge of the Queen's burial shroud. The fabric fluttered slightly, slipping off the polished wooden coffin and exposing a corner of the flag beneath. To most onlookers, it might have seemed like a minor detail, a fleeting moment easily overlooked in the solemnity of the occasion. But for James Alden, it was anything but insignificant. Without hesitation, James stepped out of formation, breaking the rigid line of guards that had marched with perfect precision up until that point. His movement was swift yet deliberate, drawing immediate attention from the crowd and the other guards. For a moment, Time seemed to freeze. The gasps were soft but unmistakable, rippling through the throng of mourners like a quiet wave. What was he doing? No one dared to speak, but the unspoken question hung heavy in the air. Was this a breach of protocol? James didn't care. All he could see was the shroud, the symbol of respect draped over the coffin of the woman who had meant so much to him. He couldn't let it remain askew, not even for a second. With trembling hands, he reached out and gently adjusted the fabric, smoothing it back into place. His touch was careful, almost reverent, as if he feared disturbing the sanctity of the moment. When he finally stepped back, the shroud lay perfectly aligned once more, covering the coffin as it should. It was a small act, barely noticeable to anyone farther away. But to James, it felt monumental. The silence that followed was deafening. The other guards stood frozen, unsure of how to react. Some exchanged uneasy glances, while others stared straight ahead, trying to maintain their composure. Among the dignitaries seated nearby, whispers began to spread. Who was this guard who had dared to step out of line? Why had he risked such a bold move during such a formal event? Questions buzzed quietly, though no one voiced them aloud. Even General Hawthorne, the stern commander of the Royal Guard, looked taken aback, his sharp eyes narrowing as he observed the scene unfold. For James, however, none of this mattered. In that moment, he wasn't thinking about rules or consequences. He was thinking about the Queen, about all the times she had shown kindness to him and others, often in ways no one else noticed. Adjusting the shroud wasn't just about following tradition. It was personal. It reminded him of how she used to fuss over her own scarf when it slipped out of place, always insisting it looked just right before stepping into public view. She carried herself with dignity, and James wanted to ensure her final journey reflected that same grace. As he returned to his position, James felt a mix of emotions swirling inside him. Relief, guilt, pride, and sadness all rolled into one. He knew what he had done would have repercussions. Breaking protocol was not something taken lightly, especially in the Royal Guard. Yet, as he glanced at the coffin one last time, he felt a strange sense of peace. Whatever happened next, he had honored her in the only way he knew how, with sincerity and love. The procession continued toward the cathedral doors, but the atmosphere had shifted. Something intangible lingered in the air, a shared awareness that this day was unlike any other. Little did James know, his simple act of defiance would soon ripple far beyond the confines of the square, touching hearts across the nation in ways he could never have imagined. The moment the funeral procession ended and the cathedral doors closed behind the mourners, James knew his actions would not go unnoticed. Protocol was everything in the Royal Guard, and stepping out of formation, even for something as seemingly minor as adjusting the Queen's burial shroud, was a grave breach. As the ceremony continued inside, James stood at his post outside, replaying the scene over and over in his mind. He hadn't acted out of defiance or recklessness. He had simply followed his heart. But now, reality began to sink in. What would happen next? Later that evening, after the crowds had dispersed and the nation settled into quiet reflection, James was summoned to meet with General Hawthorne, the commander of the Royal Guard. The general's office was austere, filled with polished wood furniture and framed medals lining the walls, a stark reminder of the discipline and tradition the Guard represented. When James entered, he found Hawthorne seated behind his desk, his expression unreadable but undeniably stern. "Captain Alden," Hawthorne began, his voice low and measured, "you are aware, I assume, that your actions today were highly irregular." James nodded stiffly, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. "Yes, sir, I am." Hawthorne leaned forward slightly, his piercing gaze fixed on James. "Then explain yourself. Why did you break protocol? You've served under Her Majesty for decades. You know better than anyone the importance of maintaining order during such events." For a moment, James hesitated. The weight of the question pressed down on him, and he struggled to find the right words. How could he possibly convey what had driven him to act so impulsively? Finally, he took a deep breath and spoke from the heart. "Sir," when the shroud slipped, it reminded me of something personal, something only those closest to her might understand. His voice wavered slightly, but he pressed on. Her Majesty always paid attention to details like that. The way she adjusted her scarf if it wasn't perfect, the care she put into every little thing. Seeing the shroud out of place felt wrong. It wasn't just fabric, it was her final resting moment. I couldn't let it stay that way. Hawthorne's brow furrowed, and for a brief second, James thought he saw a flicker of understanding in the general's eyes. But then the man sighed heavily, leaning back in his chair. "Alden, I appreciate your dedication to honoring her memory. However, rules exist for a reason. We cannot allow emotion to override duty, not even for someone like Her Majesty." "I understand, sir," James replied quietly. "But may I ask something? If you'd been in my position, if you'd known her as I did, wouldn't you have done the same?" The room fell silent. Hawthorne studied James carefully, his fingers drumming lightly on the desk. After what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke. "Perhaps, but we aren't here to speculate about hypotheticals. Your actions will need to be addressed formally." James nodded again, bracing himself for whatever punishment awaited him. Yet, as he left the office moments later, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of relief. He had told the truth, laid bare his reasons without excuses or apologies. Whether it would be enough remained to be seen. Unbeknownst to James, news of his explanation quickly spread beyond the confines of the meeting. Word reached the press, sparking curiosity among the public. People wanted to know more about the guard who had dared to defy protocol, and why his actions had moved even the stoic General Hawthorne to pause. Little did James realize that his heartfelt confession would soon open the door to revelations far greater than he could have anticipated, touching the hearts of millions across the nation. The death of Queen Eleanor III left a deep void in the hearts of her people. She wasn't just a queen. She was a mother to the nation, a beacon of hope, and a leader who always put her people first. Her passing felt like losing a part of their own family. On the day of her funeral, the streets of the capital were filled with mourners from all walks of life, young and old, rich and poor, all united by their shared sorrow. Flags hung at half-mast, and the air was heavy with silence, broken only by the occasional sob or the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. Among the sea of grieving faces stood Captain James Alden, the head of the Royal Guard. Clad in his formal uniform, he looked every bit the picture of discipline and strength. But beneath his polished exterior, James was battling emotions he had never felt before. For over 20 years, he had served as one of the Queen's closest protectors. He wasn't just her guard, he was her friend, her confidant, and sometimes even her advisor. The bond they shared went beyond duty, it was personal. As the grand procession made its way through the city, James's mind wandered back to countless moments spent in the Queen's company. He remembered how she would greet him by name each morning, asking about his daughter, Lily, and whether she was doing well in school. He recalled the time when his wife passed away suddenly, leaving him devastated and unsure of how to raise Lily alone. It was the Queen who stepped in without hesitation, arranging for help behind the scenes so James could focus on being both a father and a soldier. She never sought recognition for it. She simply did what she believed was right. Despite these memories flooding his thoughts, James forced himself to stay composed. His role required him to stand tall, to project an image of unwavering strength. After all, the eyes of the entire nation were on him and his fellow guards. They were not just escorts for the Queen's final journey. They were symbols of the monarchy itself. Every step they took, every movement they made, was steeped in tradition and protocol. There was no room for error or emotion. But today felt different. Today, James wasn't just performing his duty. He was saying goodbye to someone who had changed his life forever. As the carriage carrying the Queen's coffin rolled past the crowds, James caught glimpses of tear-streaked faces and clenched fists holding flowers or small flags. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, almost suffocating. He wondered if anyone else understood the depth of what they were losing, the kindness, the wisdom, the quiet strength that defined Queen Eleanor I. For a brief second, James allowed himself to glance at the coffin draped in the national flag. It struck him then how silent everything was. No more laughter echoing down palace hallways, no more gentle advice offered over cups of tea, just emptiness. And yet, amidst the grief, there was also gratitude, for having known her, for being touched by her light, however briefly. Little did James know that this day would test him in ways he couldn't imagine. Protocol demanded perfection, but the heart often has other plans. As the procession moved closer to the cathedral, James felt a growing tension within him. Something inside whispered that this day would change everything, not just for him, but for the entire nation. It didn't take long for James's story to make its way into the public eye. Journalists, always eager to uncover the human side of monumental events, dug deeper into the life of the man who had broken protocol at the Queen's funeral. What they found was a tale that resonated deeply with the nation, a story of kindness, gratitude, and the profound impact one person can have on another. The media soon revealed details about James Alden's personal life, particularly the hardships he had faced years earlier. When his wife passed away unexpectedly, leaving him to raise their young daughter, Lily, alone, James was overwhelmed. Grief-stricken and burdened by financial struggles, he feared he wouldn't be able to balance his duties as a father with his responsibilities as a royal guard. It was during this dark period that Queen Eleanor II quietly stepped in. She arranged for childcare assistance through trusted aides and ensured James received financial support without drawing attention to her involvement. To her, it was simply the right thing to do, but to James, it was a lifeline. As these revelations came to light, the nation was captivated. People were moved not only by the Queen's compassion, but also by the humility with which she had offered her help. She hadn't sought recognition or praise. She had acted out of genuine concern for someone under her care. This glimpse into her character reinforced everything the public already loved about her. Her empathy, her selflessness, and her ability to connect with people on a deeply personal level. Social media platforms erupted with messages of admiration and gratitude. Hashtags like #QueenEleanorLegacy and #JamesSandTQueen trended nationwide as people shared their own stories of how the Queen had touched their lives. Some recalled her surprise visits to hospitals, where she would sit beside patients, holding their hands and listening to their stories. Others remembered her funding community projects or advocating for causes close to her heart. But what struck everyone most was how much she cared, not just about grand gestures, but about the small, everyday moments that made life better for those around her. For James, the sudden spotlight was both humbling and overwhelming. Letters began pouring in from across the country, each one expressing thanks for reminding people of the Queen's humanity. Children sent drawings of the Queen alongside messages of love. Families shared photos of themselves watching the funeral, tears streaming down their faces. Strangers wrote heartfelt notes, telling James how his act of defiance had inspired them to honor the Queen's memory by performing acts of kindness in their own communities. Even critics of the monarchy found themselves moved by the story. While some had long argued against the institution itself, they couldn't deny the power of the connection between James and the Queen. Her actions transcended politics. They spoke to something universal, the desire to care for others, to lift them up when they needed it most. In a world often divided by differences, her legacy served as a reminder of what united humanity: compassion. Despite the outpouring of support, James remained modest. He declined interview requests, choosing instead to focus on his duties and reflect privately on the Queen's life. When asked by colleagues why he thought his story had resonated so deeply, he simply said, "Because it wasn't about me. It was about her. About how she made us all feel seen, valued, and loved." As the days turned into weeks, it became clear that James's simple act of adjusting the shroud had done more than break protocol. It had reignited the nation's love for the Queen and inspired countless individuals to carry forward her legacy. For many, the story of James and Queen Eleanor II was proof that even in death, kindness has the power to unite and heal. And though James never sought recognition, his courage in honoring her memory ensured that her spirit would live on, not just in history books, but in the hearts of those she had touched. The public reaction to James's story was nothing short of extraordinary. What began as a quiet moment of defiance at the Queen's funeral soon grew into a nationwide movement, fueled by the emotions stirred in the hearts of millions. People from all walks of life, farmers, teachers, business owners, students, felt an overwhelming urge to honor Queen Eleanor I's memory in their own ways. Social media became a canvas for collective mourning and celebration, with posts flooding timelines, each one carrying a personal tribute to the late monarch. In cities and towns across the nation, impromptu memorials sprang up overnight. Flower stalls reported running out of stock as people brought bouquets to statues of the Queen or placed them outside royal palaces. Some left handwritten notes alongside the flowers, sharing stories of how she had impacted their lives. One elderly woman wrote about how the Queen had once visited her village after a devastating flood, rolling up her sleeves to help rebuild homes despite protests from advisors that it wasn't proper. Another teenager shared how he'd been inspired to volunteer at a local shelter after hearing the Queen speak passionately about helping those less fortunate. Even skeptics of the monarchy found themselves drawn into the wave of emotion sweeping the country. A prominent journalist who had often criticized the royal family penned a heartfelt article titled "Why We Loved Her," acknowledging that while institutions could be flawed, individuals within them could still shine brightly. The piece went viral, resonating with readers who appreciated its honesty and vulnerability. It sparked conversations in households and workplaces, with many agreeing that Queen Eleanor II represented something rare, a leader who truly cared for her people. James's role in this phenomenon only added to the emotional weight of the moment. To the public, he wasn't just a guard. He was a symbol of loyalty, humility, and raw human connection. His willingness to break protocol spoke volumes about the depth of his bond with the Queen, and by extension, the kind of person she must have been to inspire such devotion. People admired him not because he defied rules, but because he did so out of love and respect. As days passed, creative tributes began emerging. Artists painted murals depicting the Queen surrounded by scenes of unity and compassion. Musicians composed songs celebrating her legacy, with lyrics highlighting her kindness and wisdom. Schools organized essay competitions asking students to write about what the Queen meant to them, while charities launched campaigns encouraging acts of service in her name. The hashtag #LiveLikeEleanor trended globally, inspiring people worldwide to perform small yet meaningful gestures, helping neighbors, donating to food banks, or simply offering a listening ear to someone in need. For James, the groundswell of support was both humbling and surreal. He received countless letters and gifts from strangers, hand-knitted scarves, homemade cookies, even framed poems written in the Queen's honor. Many thanked him for reminding them of the importance of humanity over rigid adherence to rules. Despite the attention, James remained grounded, deflecting praise whenever possible. When reporters camped outside his home, hoping for an interview, he politely declined, saying, "This isn't my story. It's hers." Yet, despite his modesty, James couldn't escape the fact that his actions had struck a chord. In breaking protocol, he had given voice to something many had felt but struggled to articulate: grief for a beloved leader, gratitude for her kindness, and hope that her values would endure. As the nation mourned together, united by shared memories and aspirations, it became clear that the Queen's legacy was far greater than any single act of defiance. She had planted seeds of goodness that continued to bloom long after her passing. And though James never sought recognition, his simple gesture served as a catalyst, an unspoken reminder that sometimes bending the rules is necessary to preserve what truly matters: love, respect, and the enduring power of human connection. The overwhelming public response to James's actions put General Hawthorne in an unexpected position. The commander of the Royal Guard, known for his strict adherence to protocol and unyielding discipline, found himself facing a dilemma. On one hand, James had undeniably broken the rules, a fact that could not be ignored without setting a dangerous precedent. On the other hand, the nation's reaction made it clear that punishing him would only deepen the wound left by the Queen's passing. People saw James not as a rebel, but as a hero, a man who had acted out of love and respect for someone they all cherished. After days of deliberation, General Hawthorne called James into his office once again. This time, however, the atmosphere was different. Instead of sternness, there was a hint of softness in the general's demeanor. He began by acknowledging the unique circumstances surrounding the funeral. "Captain Alden," he said, his tone measured but less severe than before, "what you did was improper. But I'd be lying if I said your reasoning didn't give me pause." James stood at attention, his expression calm but alert. He knew this conversation could go either way. Would he face formal reprimand? Suspension? Worse? Yet as the general continued speaking, James realized something had shifted. "I've reviewed the feedback from both within and outside the Guard," Hawthorne explained. "Your actions have resonated with people in ways none of us anticipated. While I cannot condone breaking protocol, I also cannot ignore the humanity behind what you did." With that, he paused, looking directly at James. "You honored Her Majesty in a way that reminded everyone why she was so beloved. For that, I believe leniency is warranted." To James's astonishment, Hawthorne announced that no formal punishment would be issued. Instead, he issued a statement to the press praising James's loyalty and dedication, framing his moment of defiance as an act born of deep respect for the Queen. The decision was met with widespread approval, further cementing the bond between the monarchy and its people. Even critics of the Royal Guard admitted that justice had been served, not through punishment, but through understanding. For James, the reprieve brought a mix of relief and humility. Though grateful for the general's mercy, he couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't deserve the praise being showered upon him. In interviews with colleagues, he repeatedly emphasized that his actions were personal, not heroic. "I wasn't thinking about anyone else when I adjusted the shroud," he confessed. "I just wanted to make sure she looked perfect, like she always did." Despite his modesty, the public embraced James as a symbol of authenticity in a world often dominated by rigid structures. His willingness to prioritize emotion over protocol resonated deeply, reminding people that even those bound by duty are still human. Inspired by his example, others began sharing their own stories of moments when they had chosen compassion over convention. A teacher recounted staying late to comfort a struggling student instead of leaving on time. A nurse described bending hospital rules to allow a family more time with a dying loved one. Each story reinforced the idea that sometimes breaking the rules is necessary to uphold what truly matters. As weeks turned into months, James slowly returned to his routine, though nothing felt quite the same. The weight of loss still lingered, but it was accompanied by a newfound sense of purpose. Moved by the Queen's legacy of kindness, he decided to carry forward her spirit in his own life. On weekends, he began volunteering at local charities, helping families in need just as the Queen had once helped him. He also started mentoring young recruits in the Royal Guard, teaching them not only about discipline but also about the importance of empathy and connection. Though James never sought recognition, his quiet efforts spoke louder than words. To many, he became proof that the Queen's influence extended far beyond her reign, that her values lived on through those she had touched. And while the nation continued to heal from its collective grief, one thing was certain: the bond between servant and sovereign, exemplified by James and Queen Eleanor II, had left an indelible mark on history, a testament to the enduring power of love, loyalty, and humanity. Months passed, and life in the nation slowly began to settle into a new rhythm. The initial wave of grief over Queen Eleanor I's passing had softened, but her memory remained alive in the hearts of her people. For James Alden, the days were quieter now, though the weight of her absence still lingered. He carried her legacy with him every day, not through grand gestures or speeches, but through small acts of kindness that mirrored the way she had lived her life. Inspired by her example, James threw himself into volunteering work. Every Saturday morning, he could be found at a local community center, helping organize food drives and clothing donations for families in need. Word spread quickly among the volunteers about who he was, the guard who had defied protocol at the Queen's funeral, and many approached him with gratitude and admiration. But James always brushed off their praise, redirecting the focus back to the cause at hand. "This isn't about me," he'd say gently. "It's about keeping her spirit alive." His efforts didn't go unnoticed. Local newspapers began featuring stories about his volunteer work, highlighting how he was channeling his love for the Queen into action. Readers were moved by his humility and dedication, and soon others joined him in his mission. What started as a modest effort grew into a citywide initiative, with hundreds of people coming together to support those less fortunate. Schools incorporated lessons on empathy and service into their curriculums, inspired by the values Queen Eleanor II had embodied. Even businesses pledged portions of their profits to charitable causes, citing her compassion as their motivation. At home, James found comfort in spending time with his daughter, Lily, who was now a teenager. She often accompanied him to the community center, rolling up her sleeves alongside him to sort supplies or pack boxes. One evening, as they sat together after a long day of volunteering, Lily looked at him thoughtfully. "Dad," she said, "do you think she knew how much she meant to people?" James smiled softly, remembering all the quiet moments he had shared with the Queen. "I think she did," he replied. "But I also think she wouldn't have wanted us to mourn forever. She'd want us to take what she gave us, her kindness, her care, and pass it on." Lily nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. It wasn't just about remembering the Queen. It was about becoming part of her legacy. Together, father and daughter resolved to keep giving back, ensuring that her impact would ripple outward for years to come. Across the nation, similar movements took root. Cities renamed parks and libraries in honor of Queen Eleanor II, turning them into spaces where communities could gather and thrive. Artists created murals celebrating her life, while musicians composed songs that played on radio stations nationwide. Schools launched scholarship programs named after her, supporting students who demonstrated exceptional kindness and leadership. Her influence stretched far beyond the walls of the palace, touching lives in ways no one could have predicted. For James, the most profound change was internal. Though he still wore his uniform proudly, he no longer saw himself solely as a protector of royalty. He realized that true service extended beyond guarding a person. It meant safeguarding the values they stood for. In honoring the Queen's memory, he had discovered a deeper purpose: to be a force for good in the world, just as she had been. As the first anniversary of her death approached, the nation prepared to commemorate her life with ceremonies, parades, and moments of reflection. At the center of it all stood James, not as a symbol of defiance, but as a testament to the enduring power of love and loyalty. On that day, as he placed a single rose at the foot of her statue, he whispered quietly, "Thank you." The crowd around him may not have heard his words, but they felt their meaning. Queen Eleanor I's reign might have ended, but her legacy lived on, not in monuments or titles, but in the hearts of those she had touched. And through James, her light continued to shine, illuminating paths of hope and compassion for generations to come.